She just wanted a moment with her daughter-in-law, but she fell into a cruel trap. She was taken to the desert and left to die, alone and tied up. The reunion with her son revealed a truth that shocked the nation. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. Mrs. Martha woke up that Thursday morning with a discreet smile on her lips. At 73, each new day was a blessing she received with silent gratitude. The September light filtered through the gaps in the lace curtains of her bedroom, illuminating the framed photographs on the antique dark wood dresser. There were the faces that made up her entire life. Her late husband, Arthur, still young and smiling in a black and white portrait, and her son, Gabriel, in various stages of life, from a baby to his graduation from business school. She rose carefully, feeling the weight of the years in her joints, and walked to the kitchen of the modest but cozy house, located in the Acacia Gardens neighborhood on the north side of Chicago. The residence wasn't large, but it carried decades of memories. Every room held stories of family Christmases, birthdays celebrated with homemade cake, and Sunday afternoons watching football with Arthur, while little Gabriel jumped on the sofa with every touchdown by the Chicago Bears. Martha prepared her breakfast with the same dedication as always. Freshly brewed coffee, toasted crusty bread with butter, and a slice of mild white cheese. She sat at the kitchen table, the same yellow formica table that had witnessed so many conversations, so much advice given to her son, so many decisions made together with her husband. Now the table seemed too large for just one person. It had been almost 10 years since Arthur had passed. A sudden heart attack without warning, without time for goodbyes. Martha still remembered the emptiness that had taken over the house in those first few months. Gabriel, who was in his early 20s at the time and just starting his career at a logistics company, was her rock. He slept in the guest room for weeks, cooked dinner with her, and they watched soap operas every night, huddled together on the sofa. But time passed, as it always does. Gabriel grew professionally, taking on management positions, then a directorship. The visits became less frequent. Family dinners turned into quick Sunday lunches, and then he met Vanessa. Martha sighed at the thought of her daughter-in-law. From their first meeting 3 years ago, something about the woman had bothered her. It wasn't anything explicit, nothing she could clearly point to. Vanessa was beautiful, well-dressed, always impeccable with her perfectly styled blonde hair and manicured nails. She spoke politely, smiled just enough, and brought gifts on special occasions. But there was something in her eyes, a coldness that Martha couldn't ignore. It was as if Vanessa were always analyzing, calculating, measuring the value of things and people. The wedding took place 2 years ago, an elegant ceremony at an expensive banquet hall on the south side. Martha wore her best dress, a navy blue one with lace details, and smiled for the photos, but her heart was heavy. She saw her son in love, devoted, almost dependent on this woman who had gradually taken over every aspect of Gabriel's life. After the wedding, the changes were swift. Gabriel was promoted again, now traveling constantly to other cities and even abroad. Vanessa, who worked as a sales manager for a cosmetics company, also had a demanding schedule. The family Sundays practically disappeared. The phone calls became increasingly shorter and more spaced out. Martha was finishing washing her coffee cup when the phone rang. She dried her hands on the embroidered dish towel and answered with anticipation. It was rare to get a call in the morning. The voice that echoed on the other end was Vanessa's, a slightly concerned, almost maternal tone that Martha had never heard from her daughter-in-law. "Mrs. Martha, good morning. How are you?" "Good morning, Vanessa. I'm well, thank God. And you?" "Oh, busy as always, but I'm fine. Look, I was just thinking, you must be very lonely in that big house, right? Gabriel mentioned he's been missing you, but his work has been impossible. He traveled again yesterday, won't be back until next week." Martha felt her heart clench. Gabriel hadn't even called to say he was leaving. "I know he works a lot," she replied, trying to hide the hurt in her voice. "Exactly, which is why I thought of a surprise. How about I stop by this afternoon? We could chat, have some coffee, maybe even go out for a bit, take a drive. I have some ideas about the future, about how we can make you more comfortable. What do you think?" Martha felt a mix of surprise and joy. Finally, Vanessa was showing some interest, some genuine concern. Perhaps she had misjudged her daughter-in-law, perhaps that coldness was just her way, the way younger people behaved these days. "I would love that, Vanessa. Please do come. What time are you thinking of arriving?" "Is 3 in the afternoon good? That way we'll have the whole afternoon to talk calmly." "Perfect. I'll prepare some treats, make some nice coffee." "Don't worry about that, Mrs. Martha. We can even grab a bite out if you'd like. See you later, then." The call ended, and Martha stood in the kitchen, the phone still in her hand, processing the conversation. A strange feeling persisted, but she pushed it away. She wasn't going to spoil this moment with silly thoughts. Vanessa was extending a hand, offering companionship, and she needed it more than she cared to admit. The next few hours were spent in preparation. Martha took a long bath, chose a nice but comfortable outfit, beige slacks and a floral blouse in shades of pink. She put on lipstick, something she rarely did lately. She carefully combed her white hair, pulling it back into a low bun. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw an elderly woman, yes, with wrinkles that told stories of laughter and tears, but still elegant, still dignified. At 3 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Martha opened the door to find Vanessa leaning against the frame, large sunglasses covering half her face and an expensive handbag slung over her shoulder. She didn't smile. "Hi, Mrs. Martha, ready?" "Yes, I am. Just let me get my purse." Martha went back inside quickly, grabbing the worn brown leather purse where she kept her documents, a little cash, and the simple cell phone Gabriel had given her for her last birthday. She locked the front door with a feeling that she was forgetting something, but she couldn't identify what it was. Vanessa's car, a gleaming silver sedan, was parked right in front of the gate. Vanessa opened the passenger door without a word and waited for Martha to get in. The elderly woman settled in with some difficulty. The seat was lower than she expected. As soon as Vanessa started the car, the atmosphere inside changed. The air conditioning was too strong, making Martha feel chilled, but she didn't want to complain. Vanessa drove in silence, her eyes fixed on the road, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Vanessa, where are we going?" Martha asked, trying to start a conversation. "We're going for a drive to see some places, just relax." The reply was curt, almost harsh. Martha felt a shiver run down her spine. This was not the tone of someone who wanted to have a pleasant time. She tried again. "How's Gabriel? Did he call before he left?" "He's fine. Working, doing what he needs to do." "And his work? Is it going well?" "It is." The short, hostile replies were forming a pattern. Martha looked out the window and realized they had already left her neighborhood. Vanessa took the Kennedy Expressway towards the interstate. The traffic was moderate, and soon they were on I-55 heading downstate. "Vanessa, where exactly are you taking me? I thought we were going to stay in the city." "I changed my mind. We need privacy to talk." Vanessa's tone was growing colder. Martha began to feel afraid, a primitive, instinctual fear that made her heart beat faster. She fumbled in her purse for her cell phone, but her hands were trembling. "What kind of conversation needs this much privacy, dear?" Vanessa let out a short, bitter laugh. "Don't call me dear. I never was and never will be your daughter." The words fell like stones inside the car. Martha felt tears burn her eyes. She tried to stay calm, to understand what was happening. "Vanessa, if I did something to hurt you, I'm sorry, but please explain what's going on." "What's going on?" Vanessa repeated, her voice rising. "I'll explain it to you perfectly, Mrs. Martha. What's going on is that you've become a problem, a big problem." "How am I a problem?" "That house you live in your name, it's worth a lot of money. Gabriel won't do anything about it because he's weak, always has been. He feels sorry for his lonely little mommy. But I'm not like that. I see things for what they are." Martha was too shocked to respond. Vanessa continued, the words spilling out like venom. "You're a burden, an expense. Gabriel spends money on your things, worries about you, and that gets in the way of our plans. We need that property. We're going to sell it, use the money to invest, to grow. But with you in the middle of it all, you complicate everything." "Vanessa, for God's sake, that house is all I have. It's where I built my family, where I raised my son. You can live there with me. I don't mind sharing." I don't want to share anything with you. I want you out of my life and out of Gabriel's life." The interstate had given way to secondary roads. Vanessa drove fast, taking increasingly empty paths. Martha looked around and saw only farmland, a few scattered farmhouses, and in the distance, a dry, arid landscape. They were heading towards the drier, more remote parts of downstate Illinois, where the soil was sandy and the vegetation sparse. "Vanessa, please take me back home. Let's talk calmly. With Gabriel. We can solve this another way." "There is no other way, Mrs. Martha, not for me." The car turned onto a dirt road, kicking up red dust. They were in a completely deserted region now. There were no houses, no people, just the vast, hot, dry expanse under the afternoon sun. Vanessa stopped the car next to an old wooden post, the remnant of some old fence that no longer existed. Martha was paralyzed with fear. Vanessa got out of the car, walked around, and yanked open the passenger door. "Get out." "Vanessa, don't do this, for the love of God." "I said get out." With firm, cruel hands, Vanessa pulled Martha out of the car. The elderly woman stumbled and fell to her knees on the hot dirt. The pain was immediate, but the terror was greater. Vanessa took a rope from the trunk and, ignoring Martha's pleas and tears, tied her hands to the rough wooden post. "You're going to stay here, Mrs. Martha. You'll have time to think about everything. And who knows, if you're lucky, someone will pass by before it's too late. Vanessa, I'm an old woman. I won't survive out here." "Not my problem." Martha begged, cried, screamed, but Vanessa was already back in the car. The last image Martha had was of her daughter-in-law taking off her sunglasses, revealing eyes completely devoid of compassion, before starting the engine and speeding away. The car kicked up a dense cloud of dust that covered everything, getting into Martha's eyes and mouth. And then, silence. The sun was high and relentless. Martha tried to free herself, but the rope was too tight. Every movement cut into her delicate skin. She looked around, desperate for any sign of life, any chance of rescue. But there was nothing. Only the hot wind blowing across the barren land, carrying her voice away when she tried to scream for help. The hours began to pass. The sun burned her exposed skin. Thirst came quickly, a desperate thirst that left her throat scratching and her lips cracking. Martha tried to focus on good memories to keep from going mad. She thought of Arthur, of the day they met at a dance at the club. He was handsome, polite, hard-working. They built a life together, simple but full of love. She thought of baby Gabriel, so tiny in her arms, with those curious eyes looking at her as if she were the whole world. She thought of every word she taught her son, every scrape she cleaned, every fever she monitored through the night. She had dedicated her entire life to that boy, and now here she was, abandoned like a worthless object. Martha's consciousness began to waver. Dehydration was causing her body to react in frightening ways. She saw shadows that weren't there, heard voices that were only the wind. At one point, she was certain that Arthur was there, holding out his hand to her, calling her to join him. But then, as the sun began to set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Martha heard a different sound, the rumble of an old, sputtering engine. She tried to scream, but could barely manage a hoarse croak. The sound grew louder, closer. It was an old, dusty pickup truck driven by a middle-aged man with sun-weathered skin, wearing a faded t-shirt and a straw hat. He was on his way home from work at a nearby farm when he saw something strange on the side of the road. He approached slowly, not believing his eyes. An elderly woman tied to a post under that terrible sun. Joe Roberts slammed on the brakes, stumbled out of the truck in his haste, and ran to Martha. His eyes widened in shock and compassion. "My God, ma'am, what did they do to you?" He pulled a pocket knife from his pocket and carefully cut the rope, supporting Martha as she collapsed. He grabbed a water bottle he had in the truck and slowly wet her lips, knowing he couldn't give her too much water at once. "Easy now, easy. You're safe now. I'm going to now. Take you to town. There's a clinic there. Hang on." Martha could barely speak. Her vocal cords were damaged by dehydration, but she squeezed Joe's hand tightly, trying to convey her gratitude. He carefully placed her in the passenger seat, covered her with an old shirt he had there, and drove as fast as the truck would allow. The town was small, called Hope's Crossing, and it was about 10 miles away. It had one main dirt road, a few simple houses, a church, a small market, and a health clinic that was open 3 times a week. It was Thursday, a day it was open. Joe Roberts honked frantically as he arrived, and soon several people came out of their houses. The nurse, Lucy, a strong, competent woman in her 40s, immediately took charge. She helped carry Martha into the clinic, placed her on a cot, and began to check her vital signs. "Joe, what happened?" "I found her tied to a post out on the old road. Looks like someone just left her there on purpose." A murmur of outrage spread through the small group gathering at the clinic door. Lucy treated Martha with extreme care, cleaning her, burns hydrating her slowly, and covering her with clean sheets. She called the doctor who served the town, Dr. Henry, who arrived quickly on his motorcycle. As she was being cared for, Martha felt the humanity of these people. She had never seen any of them before, but they treated her as if she were one of their own, as if she were precious and deserving of all care. Tears streamed silently down her face, not just from the physical pain, but from the unexpected kindness. That evening, when she was finally able to speak a few words, Martha told them what had happened. Each word was an effort, but she needed them to know. She needed someone to stop Vanessa from getting away with it. Lucy held her hand tightly. "You're safe now, Mrs. Martha. No one is going to hurt you anymore. We'll call the police, and we'll take care of you until you're fully recovered." That night, Martha slept for the first time in many hours on a makeshift bed in the clinic, with Lucy keeping watch by her side. And as she slept, exhausted and traumatized, she didn't know that her story was just beginning, and that this small welcoming town would be the setting for her renewal and her fight for justice. Dawn in Hope's Crossing arrived with the crowing of roosters and the smell of fresh coffee from neighboring houses. Martha opened her eyes slowly, disoriented. For a brief moment she didn't know where she was. The dark wooden ceiling, the walls painted a faded blue, the soft light coming through a small window. Then it all came flooding back. Vanessa, the desolate landscape, the heat, the abandonment. Her whole body ached. Lucy entered the room with a simple tray holding a mug of warm tea and some toast with jam. "Good morning, Mrs. Martha. How are you feeling?" Martha tried to sit up, but the pain in her back and arms was intense. Lucy helped her patiently, arranging the pillows behind her. "I'm alive," Martha answered, her voice still hoarse. "Thanks to you and Joe, I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed. Anyone would have done the same. We look after each other here." Lucy placed the tray on Martha's lap. "Try to eat something. Your body needs to recover." As Martha ate slowly, savoring each small sip of tea as if it were a gift, Lucy told her what had happened during the night. "We called Sergeant Carter. He's in charge of security for this area. He came by early this morning, wants to talk to you. And there are more people who want to help. Mrs. Helen and Mr. John, a couple who live near the town square, said they have a spare room in their house. They want you to stay there while you recover." Martha felt her eyes well up with tears again. These people didn't even know her, yet they were willing to open their homes, their lives, to welcome her. "Why are you all doing this for me?" Lucy smiled gently. "Because it's the right thing to do, Mrs. Martha, and because you need it. It's as simple as that." Sergeant Ben Carter arrived shortly after 8 o'clock. He was a serious man in his 50s, with a greying mustache and a uniform that was immaculate despite the heat that was already building. He sat in a chair next to Martha's bed and took a small notebook from his pocket. "Good morning, ma'am. My name is Ben Carter. I'm a sergeant with the state police and responsible for this region. Nurse Lucy told me what happened, but I need to hear it from you, in detail if you're able. I know it's difficult, but it's important for us to take action." Martha took a deep breath and began to tell her story. From Vanessa's morning phone call, the false tone of concern, the silent drive down the interstate, the cruel words inside the car, and finally the abandonment in the middle of nowhere. She gave Vanessa's full name, the address of her and Gabriel's house in Chicago, every detail she could remember. The field sergeant wrote everything down meticulously, asking pointed questions when necessary. When Martha finished, he closed his notebook and looked at her with a mixture of restrained anger and compassion. "You've been the victim of a very serious crime, Mrs. Martha. I'm going to contact the Chicago Police Department immediately. We'll need you to file a formal police report, but we can do that here with the help of a detective who comes from Rockford once a week. In the meantime, I'll ensure you are safe and cared for. Sergeant, my son Gabriel, he doesn't know anything. He's traveling. I need to talk to him. We'll locate your son too, don't you worry. Do you have his cell number? Martha then remembered her purse, which had been left in Vanessa's car. I don't. My purse was left in her car, but I know the number by heart. The sergeant offered his own cell phone, and Martha dialed Gabriel's number with trembling fingers. It rang several times, but no one answered. She tried twice more, with the same result. She left a voicemail, trying to sound calm despite her desperation. Gabriel, my son, it's Mom. Please call me as soon as you... Get this message. It's urgent. I'm okay, but I really need to talk to you. After returning the phone to the sergeant, Martha felt a hollowness in her chest. Where could Gabriel be? Had Vanessa already made up some story, some lie to cover what she had done? The sergeant noticed her distress. Mrs. Martha, I'm going to alert the authorities in Chicago. They will look for your son and your daughter-in-law. You can be sure that this woman will not go unpunished. Lucy entered the room at that moment, accompanied by an elderly couple. The woman had completely white, hair tied in a loose bun, a round, kind face, and was wearing a simple floral dress. The man was thin, with thick-rimmed glasses and a shy smile. Mrs. Martha, these are Mr. and Mrs. John and Helen that I mentioned. They've come to meet you. Helen approached the bed and took Martha's hand gently. My dear, what a terrible ordeal you've been through, but you're not alone anymore. John and I want you to come and stay at our house. We have a comfortable little room. It's simple, but it's clean and welcoming. You can stay with us for as long as you need. John nodded emphatically. That's right. The house is small, but there's always room for one more with plenty of love. And Helen makes a homemade meal that's a true blessing. Martha couldn't hold back her tears. All this generosity, coming from complete strangers, seemed unreal after everything she had been through. I don't want to be a burden to you. You've already done so much for me. Nonsense, Helen exclaimed. It will be a joy to have you with us. Our children live far away. We get very lonely. You'll be company for us. Doctor Henry, who had been listening from the doorway, came in and did a quick assessment of Martha. The burns are being treated. Her hydration is improving. But Mrs. Martha will need rest, daily dressing changes, and follow-up care. I'll be back on Monday to see how she's progressing. Helen nodded firmly. Don't you worry, Doctor. I'll take care of her as if she were my own mother. Later that same day, with the help of Joe Roberts, who returned with his pickup truck, Martha was carefully transferred to Helen and John's house. The residence was just 3 blocks from the clinic, on a quiet street where children played on the sidewalk and neighbors greeted each other with familiarity. The house was a single-story home, painted a pale yellow with a small front porch holding 2 rocking chairs and pots of begonias. Inside, it was modest but impeccably clean and organized. It smelled of lavender and homemade cake. The room they prepared for Martha had a single bed with a handmade patchwork quilt, an antique dresser, and a window that looked out onto a small backyard where John grew some vegetables. Helen helped Martha lie down, covered her with affection, and sat on the edge of the bed. You need to rest now. If you need anything at all, just call. I'll be right nearby. That afternoon, as Martha tried to sleep, her mind couldn't calm down. She thought constantly of Gabriel. Where was he? Had Vanessa already done something to the house? Had she forged documents, invented stories? Fear and anguish kept her awake, despite her exhausted body. Meanwhile, in Chicago, things were beginning to move in ways Martha didn't yet know. Sergeant Carter had alerted the police in the capital, and a team of detectives began to look for information on Vanessa Costa, married to Gabriel Costa, residing in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. The police went to the residential address, but no one was home. Neighbors reported that the husband traveled a lot for work, and that the wife hadn't been seen for a few days either. It was then that the investigators obtained Gabriel's corporate phone number through his company. The call found him in a hotel in Dallas, where he was in a business meeting. When he answered and identified himself as Gabriel Costa, the investigator got straight to the point. Mr. Costa, this is Detective Marcus Foster with the Chicago Police Department. I'm calling because we've received a serious report involving your wife, Vanessa Costa, and your mother, Martha Costa. Do you know where your mother is at this moment?" Gabriel felt the floor drop out from under him. "My mother? She's at home on the north side. Why? What's happened?" "Mr. Costa, your mother was found abandoned in a deserted area of downstate Illinois, tied to a post, in a serious state of dehydration and with sunburns. She accuses your wife of taking her there and intentionally abandoning her." Gabriel dropped the phone. Literally. The device clattered to the floor of the hotel room as he staggered backward, a wave of nausea rising in his throat. This couldn't be true. It couldn't. He picked the phone back up with trembling hands. "Where is my mother now? Is she okay? I need to get to her." "She's being cared for in a small town called Hope's Crossing, downstate Illinois. She's out of immediate danger but very shaken. Mr. Costa, we need you to return to Chicago as soon as possible. We need to speak with you in person and we need to locate your wife." "Vanessa is at home, at least she was when I left." "We've already been there, no one is home. When was the last time you spoke with her?" Gabriel tried to think, but his brain felt frozen. "Yesterday. No, the day before. She called me, said everything was fine, that I shouldn't worry." "Mr. Costa, is your vehicle at home?" "It is. I flew here. Vanessa has her own car." "We need the license plate of her vehicle and any information that might help us locate her. In the meantime, it would be best for you to come to Chicago. And then go to Hope's Crossing to see your mother. She needs you." The call ended with Gabriel frantically scribbling down the investigator's contact information and the details of where his mother was. He cancelled all his meetings, caught the first flight back to Chicago, and on the plane tried to process what was happening. Vanessa, his wife, the woman with whom he shared his bed, his plans, his life, had tried to kill his mother. No, not just tried. She had left her to die in the wilderness. How could anyone do that? How had he not realized he was married to a monster? Tears streamed down Gabriel's face as he stared out the airplane window, watching the clouds go by. He remembered all the times his mother had tried to reach out, all the times he had chosen work, chosen Vanessa, chosen anything but being present. The guilt was devastating. Upon landing at Midway, Gabriel went straight home, accompanied by the investigators who were waiting for him at the airport. The house was empty and silent. In the bedroom, he noticed that many of Vanessa's clothes were gone. She had packed her bags and fled. The investigators searched the residence for clues. They found documents related to Martha's house, contracts from real estate agencies, property value appraisals. Vanessa had indeed been planning to sell her mother-in-law's house. There were even drafts of power of attorney documents that attempted to mimic Martha's signature. Gabriel sat on the living room sofa and put his face in his hands. How had he been so blind? How had he not seen what was right in front of him? Vanessa had always been cold, but he had attributed it to her personality, her strong character. He never imagined she was capable of real cruelty. It was then that he remembered something: his mother's cell phone. He had access to the account because he had set up the device for her. He quickly opened the location tracking app on his own phone. If his mother's phone was still on, he could track it. The red dot appeared on the map. The phone was stationary somewhere between Chicago and downstate. Gabriel showed the investigators, who immediately dispatched patrol cars in the area. In less than 2 hours, they found the cell phone and Martha's purse, discarded on the shoulder of a dirt road. Vanessa had gotten rid of the evidence, but she hadn't counted on Gabriel being able to track the device. Tollway cameras on I-55 captured images of Vanessa's car on both the trip out and the trip back. The timeline matched Martha's account perfectly. The police issued a warrant for her arrest. Vanessa was now officially a fugitive. Gabriel got in his car and drove for nearly 4 hours until he reached Hope's Crossing. It was night when he finally parked in front of Helen and John's house. He had called ahead to let them know he was coming. Sergeant Carter was waiting for him on the porch. "Mr. Costa, I'm Sergeant Carter. Your mother is sleeping, but if you'd like to see her, we can wake her gently." "Please," Gabriel could barely speak. "I need to see her." Helen led him to the room, walking on tiptoe. A small lamp was on, casting a soft glow. Martha was sleeping on her side, her breathing light and uneven. Her face was sunburned, her lips cracked, her arms bandaged. Gabriel felt his legs grow weak. That was his mother. The woman who had raised him, who had spent sleepless nights by his side when he was sick, who had worked so hard to give him a decent life. And now she was here, broken because of the woman he had chosen. He knelt beside the bed and took Martha's hand gently, careful not to hurt her injuries. Tears fell uncontrollably down his face. "Mom," he whispered. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for everything." Martha opened her eyes slowly. It took a few seconds for them to focus, and when she recognized her son, her face transformed into a mixture of relief and pain. "Gabriel, you're here." "I'm here, Mom. I'm here, and I'm not leaving your side again, I swear." Mother and son cried together that night, surrounded by the comforting silence of Hope's Crossing. Gabriel told her that the police were looking for Vanessa, that she wouldn't get away with it. Martha, in turn, told him about the kindness of the townspeople, about Helen and John, about Joe Roberts, who had saved her. "These people, my son, they're angels. I was lost, and they found me. They treated me like family." Gabriel squeezed his mother's hand. "I'm going to thank every single one of them, and I'm going to take care of you from now on, Mom. The right way, the way I always should have." That same night, somewhere between Illinois and the Missouri border, Vanessa drove non-stop, constantly checking her rearview mirror. She had underestimated the situation. She thought no one would find the old woman, that the case would be filed away as a simple disappearance. She hadn't counted on someone driving down that abandoned road. Now she was a fugitive, with the police on her trail, and all her plans were unraveling. But Vanessa was not the type to give up easily. She still had money saved, contacts, in other cities. She would find a way out. She always did. What she didn't know was that as she drove through the dark night, the authorities were already closing in. Every toll booth, every gas station, every security camera along the way was being checked. It was only a matter of time until she was found. And in Hope's Crossing, as Martha slept beside her son after months of distance, a new hope was beginning to dawn. Not just the hope for justice, but the hope of rebuilding, of a new life surrounded by people who saw her value, who respected and cared for her. The road ahead would still be long and painful, the trial, the hearings, the confrontation. But Martha was no longer alone. She had Gabriel back. She had an entire community supporting her, and she had, for the first time in a long time, the certainty that she deserved to be loved and protected. Vanessa's arrest happened 3 days later at a gas station on the Missouri border. She had made a fatal mistake, using her credit card to buy gas. The transaction was tracked immediately, and a local patrol car intercepted her before she could get back on the road. According to the officers who arrested her, she maintained her composure, denying any wrongdoing with a disturbing calm. "You're making a mistake. I haven't done anything wrong. This is all a misunderstanding involving my mother-in-law, who unfortunately has memory problems." But the physical evidence didn't lie. The tollway camera footage showed her car coming and going. The testimony of the man who rescued Martha was detailed and consistent. The rope marks on the victim's wrists perfectly matched the type of rope found in the trunk of Vanessa's vehicle. And there was more. The documents found in her home, planning the sale of Martha's property without her knowledge. The news of the arrest reached Hope's Crossing via a call from Detective Foster to Sergeant Carter, who immediately went to Helen and John's house to inform Martha and Gabriel. It was a Saturday morning, and Gabriel was helping John water the vegetables in the backyard when the sergeant arrived. "Good morning. I have news." The 3 men went inside, where Martha was sitting on the enclosed porch, with Helen by her side helping to change the dressings on her arms. In the past few days, the burns had begun to heal, but the pain was still constant. More difficult than the physical pain, however, was the emotional trauma. Martha would wake up during the night with nightmares, reliving the moment of abandonment, the unbearable heat, the fear of dying alone. "Mrs. Martha, Mr. Costa," the sergeant began, removing his cap out of respect. "I've just received confirmation. Vanessa Costa was arrested a few hours ago on the Missouri border. She is being brought back to Chicago and will be held in custody pending trial. Gabriel closed his eyes and took a deep breath. It was a mixture of relief and profound sadness. The woman with whom he had shared his life, his dreams, was now a criminal being taken into police custody. Martha, on the other hand, felt something different. It wasn't exactly joy, but a sense that the truth was finally being recognized. She wasn't crazy, she hadn't made anything up. What Vanessa had done was real, criminal, and now she would have to answer for it. "What happens now?" Gabriel asked. "There will be preliminary hearings. Her defense will try various arguments, but with the evidence we have, it's very likely the case will go to trial. The prosecutor's office is working with the charges: aggravated attempted murder, unlawful imprisonment, elder abuse, and document forgery. These are serious crimes." Helen held Martha's hand firmly. "And will Mrs. Martha have to testify?" "Yes, she will be the prosecution's main witness, but we will do everything to make it as least traumatic as possible, and she won't be alone." In the weeks that followed, Hope's Crossing became an unexpected refuge for Martha and Gabriel. He had taken a leave of absence from work, explaining the situation to his superiors, who were understanding. Gabriel rented a small room at a local inn so as not to impose on Helen and John, but he spent his days entirely with his mother, caring for her. It was a time of healing, but also of reconnection. Mother and son, who had become almost strangers in recent years, now talked for hours. Gabriel told her about his work, the travel, the pressures, but also about how he had lost his way, how he had let Vanessa isolate him from his own mother. "She was subtle, Mom. She never explicitly said I shouldn't visit you, but there was always something planned for. The weekends, always an excuse not to go to your house. And I, like an idiot, just went along with it all without question." Martha caressed her son's face. "You're not an idiot, my love. You were manipulated by someone who knew exactly what she was doing. But now you see. And that's what matters." Gabriel also grew close to the people of the town. He met Joe Roberts in person, the humble man who had saved his mother, and couldn't hold back tears as he shook his hand. "I don't know how to thank you for what you did. You saved my mother's life." Joe Roberts, embarrassed by so much gratitude, just nodded. "I did what any decent person would do, son. Your mother is a good woman. She didn't deserve to suffer like that." Gabriel insisted on helping Joe Roberts financially, but the man firmly refused. In the end, Gabriel only managed to convince him to accept help fixing his old pickup truck, which was always breaking down. The story of what had happened to Martha began to leak to the press. At first it was local reports, but soon the major Chicago news outlets picked up the story. The case had all the elements that grab attention: an elderly woman abandoned in a remote area, a cruel daughter-in-law, a successful son caught in the middle, and a small community that took in the victim. Journalists started showing up in Hope's Crossing, wanting to interview Martha, Joe Roberts, Helen, and John. Sergeant Carter did his best to protect everyone's privacy, but it was impossible to contain it completely. It was Helen who suggested that Martha give one interview, just one, to a serious media outlet, and tell her side of the story completely. That way, perhaps the other. Journalists would leave her in peace. Gabriel was initially against it. "Mom, you don't have to expose yourself like this. Let the justice system do its job." But Martha had a different perspective. "Son, if I tell my story, maybe it will help other people who are going through the same thing. How many elderly people are mistreated, abandoned, forced out of their homes? If my pain can shed some light on this problem, then it's worth it." The interview was granted to a respected reporter from a television program known for handling social issues with seriousness. She traveled to Hope's Crossing with a small crew, and the recording took place at Helen and John's house with Martha sitting on the porch, Gabriel by her side. Martha told them everything. From Gabriel and Vanessa's wedding, the growing distance, the fateful phone call, the terrible drive, the abandonment. She spoke of the hours under the sun, believing she was going to die, and of the miracle of her rescue. She spoke of the kindness of the people of Hope's Crossing, who took her in when she needed it most. There was no over-dramatization, no rehearsed tears. Martha spoke with the dignity of someone who had lived a long time, suffered a great deal, but had not lost the essence of who she was, and that deeply touched everyone who watched. When the program aired 2 weeks later, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with messages of support for Martha and outrage against Vanessa. Elder protection movements used the case as an example of the need for stricter laws. Donations began to arrive for Martha and for the town of Hope's Crossing, which gained national visibility. But not everything was positive. Vanessa's defense team also made its move, and aggressively. They hired a lawyer known for defending controversial cases, Dr. Silas Blackwood, a middle-aged man with a reputation for winning unlikely acquittals through aggressive tactics. He gave interviews claiming that Martha suffered from dementia, that she had put herself in danger, and that Vanessa was, in fact, a victim of a manipulative mother-in-law who was using the story to destroy her marriage and reputation. My client is a hard-working, honest woman who tried to care for a difficult mother-in-law. The alleged victim has a history of forgetfulness and mental confusion, as several neighbors can attest. What happened was a tragedy resulting from the stubbornness of an elderly woman who insisted on leaving the house alone and got lost. My client tried to help, but was unjustly accused. The allegations were false and offensive, but legally permissible in the context of a defense. Gabriel was furious watching the interview. How can he say those things? My mother has no mental problems. The prosecuting attorney, Franklin Lowe, assigned by the district attorney's office, was calmer and more strategic. They'll try anything, Gabriel. It's their job, but we have solid evidence. We have the cameras, we have Mr. Roberts' testimony, we have the physical injuries, we have the forged documents. The truth will prevail. The following months were a period of intense preparation. Martha had to undergo several psychiatric and cognitive evaluations to prove she was in full command of her mental faculties. All the tests confirmed it. She had no dementia, no condition that compromised her memory or judgment. Gabriel was also called to testify several times, recounting how his mother's relationship with Vanessa had deteriorated, the comments Vanessa made about Martha's house, the increasingly frequent suggestions to sell the property. During this time, an interesting transformation took place. Martha, who had arrived in Hope's Crossing broken and hopeless, began to flourish again. Gabriel's constant presence, the affection of Helen and John, the support of the entire community were like water for a withered plant. She started helping Helen in the kitchen, teaching her old recipes she had learned from her own mother. She attended services at the small-town church. She sat in the central square in the afternoons to chat with other ladies. She laughed again. John used to say to Gabriel, "Your mother is a warrior. Look at what she's been through and she can still smile still. Take care of others. That's true strength." And it was true. Martha discovered a resilience she never knew she had. The trauma was there. The physical and emotional scars would remain. But she was choosing not to be defined solely by that. She was a survivor, not a victim. Meanwhile, in a Chicago jail awaiting trial, Vanessa maintained her stance of innocence. She received visits from her family, who either believed her version of events or pretended to. She studied the case files with her lawyer, looking for loopholes, ways to escape. She looked at the grey cell walls and felt anger. Anger at Martha for surviving, anger at Joe Roberts for showing up on that road, anger at Gabriel for believing his mother instead of her. But remorse? Genuine guilt? That she did not feel. For Vanessa, the problem hadn't been what she did, but the fact that she was caught. If that man hadn't passed by, if no one had found Martha, everything would be settled by now. The house would be sold, the money in her account, and she would be getting on with her life without a guilty conscience. Vanessa's coldness, however, would be her biggest problem at the upcoming trial. Because even the best lawyers have difficulty defending someone who is genuinely incapable of showing remorse. The trial date was set for a Monday in May at the Layton Criminal Courthouse in Chicago. It would be a jury trial with 7 ordinary people deciding Vanessa's fate based on the evidence presented and the arguments of the lawyers. The week before the trial, Martha returned to Chicago with Gabriel. They stayed in a simple hotel near the courthouse. Helen and John insisted on coming along to provide moral support. Joe Roberts also wanted to attend to testify in person about what he had seen. On the eve of the trial, Gabriel took Martha to visit her old house in Acacia Gardens. He had been there a few times over the past months, keeping everything clean and tidy. But Martha hadn't been back since that fateful Thursday. When they walked through the door, Martha was overcome by a whirlwind of emotions. Here was her entire life, the photographs on the walls, the sofa where she watched television with Arthur, the kitchen where she had prepared thousands of meals. But now everything seemed different, tainted by the memory of what Vanessa had planned to do. "Do you want to move back here, Mom?" Gabriel asked softly. Martha walked through the rooms, touching the furniture, the curtains, remembering. Finally, she turned to her son. "I don't know, Gabriel. This house has so many good memories, but now it also has the shadow of everything that happened. I need time to decide." "You have all the time in the world, and whatever you decide, I'll be by your side." They locked up the house and returned to the hotel. Martha spent a sleepless night, mentally rehearsing what she would say in court the next day. She would have to face Vanessa again, have to recount everything in detail, in front of strangers, judges, a jury, the press. The fear was there, latent and real. But along with the fear was a steely determination. She wouldn't be doing this just for herself. She would be doing it for all the elderly people who suffer in silence, who are mistreated, forgotten, treated like a useless burden. Her pain would have a purpose. When the sun rose that Monday, Martha put on the navy blue suit Gabriel had bought for her, carefully combed, her white hair, and looked at herself in the mirror. She saw a woman who had been through hell but had emerged with her dignity intact. "I'm ready," she said to Gabriel, who was waiting at the door of the room. Together, accompanied by Helen, John, and Joe Roberts, they headed to the criminal courthouse. The imposing grey building awaited them. Within those walls, the truth would be revealed, justice would be sought, and Vanessa would have to answer for her actions. The lobby was filled with reporters, but the security team kept everything organized. Martha walked with her head held high, ignoring the flashing cameras and shouted questions. They went up to the courtroom, a large room with public seating, the lawyers' tables, the jury box, and the judge's bench. Vanessa was already there, sitting next to her lawyer, wearing a discreet business suit, her hair pulled back without excessive makeup, clearly an attempt to appear more human, more vulnerable. When Martha entered, their eyes met for a brief moment. There was no remorse in Vanessa's eyes, only cold calculation. But Martha didn't look away. She faced her daughter-in-law directly, silently communicating that she was no longer afraid, that she would not be intimidated again. The judge entered, everyone rose, and the trial began. The battle for truth and justice was just beginning. The public prosecutor, Franklin Lowe, was the first to speak. He was a man in his 50s, with graying hair, thin-rimmed glasses, and a calm but commanding presence. He walked to the center of the room, facing the jury of 7 ordinary citizens, 2 men and 5 women of various ages and professions. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began in a clear, firm voice, "you are here to judge one of the most heinous crimes that can be committed against a human being, the intentional abandonment of an elderly, defenseless person in a remote and dangerous location with the clear intent to cause her death. The defendant, Vanessa Costa, did not act on impulse. She planned. She calculated. She executed a cruel and cowardly plan against her own mother-in-law, a 73-year-old woman who had never done her any harm." Mr. Lowe then began to present the evidence one by one, in a methodical and devastating manner. He showed the images from the tollway cameras displayed on a large screen for all to see. There was Vanessa's silver car passing through the toll plaza on I-55, with her at the wheel and Martha beside her, at 3:42 p.m. Then, the same car returning alone, with only Vanessa at 6:15 p.m. 3 hours, the prosecutor emphasized. 3 hours to take the victim to an isolated spot, abandon her tied to a post and return, all coldly calculated. Next, the recorded testimony of Joe Roberts was presented. The simple, honest man recounted, in rich detail, how he found Martha tied up, dehydrated, sunburned, in critical condition. His voice cracked as he remembered the desperation in her eyes. The medical photographs were displayed. The second-degree burns on Martha's arms and face, the deep marks left by the rope on her wrists, the state of severe dehydration that could have caused multiple organ failure within a few more hours. "This woman," Mr. Lowe said, pointing to Martha, who was seated in the witness area, "was saved by pure luck. If that generous man had not driven down that road at that exact moment, Mrs. Martha would not be here today. She would have died alone, in agonizing suffering because of the defendant's greed and cruelty." When the documents found in Vanessa's house were presented, including the contracts with real estate agencies and the attempts to forge Martha's signature to sell the house, the jury was visibly shocked. There was the motive: money, pure and simple. Then came the moment for Martha's testimony. She was called to the stand, sat in the witness chair, and swore an oath to tell the truth. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. Mr. Lowe guided her through the events of that day. Martha told of Vanessa's call, the falsely concerned tone, the hope of finally having a moment to connect with her daughter-in-law. She told of the silent drive, the cold and hostile answers, the growing fear as they drove further from the city. "When she took me to that deserted place," Martha continued, her voice now choked with emotion, "I begged her. I told her I didn't understand what was happening, to please take me back home. And do you know what she said?" Martha looked directly at Vanessa, who remained impassive beside her lawyer. "She said I was a useless burden, that I was getting in the way of her plans, that she needed to get rid of me, so she could sell my house and use the money. She tied me to that post with her own hands, ignoring my pleas for mercy, and left me there to die." A heavy silence fell over the room. Some people in the audience were wiping away tears. The jurors looked at Vanessa with expressions ranging from disgust to disbelief. "Mrs. Martha," the prosecutor asked gently, "at any point did the defendant show any remorse or hesitation?" "No," Martha answered with absolute certainty. Her eyes were empty. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she didn't care. To her, I was just an obstacle that needed to be removed. When it was the defense's turn to cross-examine Martha, Dr. Silas Blackwood took an aggressive approach, trying to confuse the elderly woman and question her memory. "Mrs. Martha, don't you think it's possible you misunderstood my client's intentions, that perhaps you felt unwell during the drive and my client was trying to help?" Martha looked him straight in the eye. "Sir, I may be 73 years old, but my mind is perfectly clear. I know exactly what happened to me. Your client was not helping me. She was trying to kill me." The lawyer tried other tactics, questioning whether Martha had a difficult relationship with her daughter-in-law, if there had been prior arguments, trying to plant the seed of provocation. But Martha answered every question with dignity and clarity, never contradicting herself, never wavering. Gabriel was also called to testify. He spoke about his marriage to Vanessa, how she had gradually isolated him from his mother, how she always had excuses for them not to visit Mrs. Martha, how she frequently talked about her house and the money it could generate if sold. "I was blind," Gabriel admitted, his voice breaking, with emotion. "I didn't see that I was being manipulated. I thought my wife was just being practical, thinking about our future. I never imagined she was capable of such cruelty against my own mother." When asked if he believed Vanessa was capable of the crime, Gabriel did not hesitate. "Yes, after seeing all the evidence, after talking at length with my mother and understanding everything that happened behind the scenes of our marriage, I am absolutely certain that she did this, and she did it intentionally." The most impactful testimony, however, was that of Joe Roberts. The simple man in his modest clothes and humble demeanor moved everyone as he described the rescue. "I could hardly believe what I was seeing," he said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "It was an old lady, all burned, tied up like an animal to that post. She looked at me with such desperate eyes, so full of pain that my heart nearly stopped. I thought to myself, what kind of monster does this to a helpless old woman?" Joe Roberts looked at Vanessa as he continued, "And when I found out it was her own daughter-in-law, her son's wife, I was speechless. How can someone who joined the family treat a mother like that? Where is this woman's humanity? The defense tried to question whether Joe Roberts might be mistaken about the condition in which he found Martha, suggesting that perhaps she had injured herself trying to get free. But Joe Roberts was adamant. No, sir. That lady was tied up way too tight to have done that herself, and the marks on the ground showed someone had dragged her there. There's no confusion, someone did that to her on purpose. When it was the defense's turn to present its case, Dr. Blackwood did what he could. He brought character witnesses to speak about Vanessa, colleagues who described her as professional, dedicated, and responsible. He tried to argue that there were undisclosed conflicts between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, that Martha was possibly jealous of her son's wife. Vanessa was called to testify in her own defense. She took the stand with a controlled posture, answering her lawyer's questions with a studied calm. "I loved my mother-in-law," she said, and some in the audience murmured in disbelief. "I only wanted to help. She was becoming more and more confused, forgetful. That day I offered to take her for a drive to talk about care options, but during the trip she became agitated, aggressive. I stopped the car to calm her down, and she ran off. When I managed to catch up to her, she had fallen and was disoriented. I panicked, and I admit, I made the terrible mistake of leaving in a state of desperation instead of calling for help immediately. But I never, ever tried to hurt her." It was an elaborate, rehearsed lie, but one that couldn't stand up to the physical evidence. The prosecutor in his cross-examination was relentless. "Ms. Costa, if your mother-in-law was confused and disoriented, why did you tie her to a post?" "I didn't tie her. She must have tripped on an old rope that was there." "And the marks on her wrists, perfectly aligned, matching the exact type of rope found in your trunk?" Vanessa hesitated for the first time. I can't explain that." "And the documents in your home planning the sale of the victim's property without her knowledge? Was that also a result of her mental confusion?" "I was just exploring options for when the right time came." "The right time? The time when your mother-in-law was dead?" "No, I never said that." But the damage was done. Vanessa's mask of composure had cracked, revealing the coldness beneath. The jury saw it, the audience saw it, the judge saw it. The lawyers made their closing arguments. The defense tried to plant reasonable doubt, asking the jury to consider the possibility of a misinterpreted accident, of a confused old woman falsely accusing a daughter-in-law who was only trying to help. But the prosecutor concluded with a powerful appeal. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not a case of subjective interpretation. This is a case of concrete, irrefutable facts. The defendant took her mother-in-law to a remote location. The defendant abandoned her there, tied up under the scorching sun. The defendant returned home without rendering aid, without calling the authorities, without showing any concern for the victim's well-being. If it weren't for a miracle, for a kind man who happened to pass by, Mrs. Martha would have died. And that was precisely the defendant's intention." The prosecutor paused, letting the words sink in. "Vanessa Costa does not deserve your sympathy. She does not deserve a second chance. What she deserves is to be held accountable for the heinous act she committed, for the attempted murder of an elderly, vulnerable, and trusting person. I ask you to deliver justice, not just for Mrs. Martha, but for all the elderly who suffer in silence, who are mistreated, forgotten, and discarded as if they have no value. Show with your verdict that an elderly life matters, that cruelty will not go unpunished, that justice will prevail." The jury retired to deliberate. The hours that followed were filled with unbearable tension. Martha sat in a private room for victims, accompanied by Gabriel, Helen, John, and Joe Roberts. No one spoke much. The weight of the moment was too great for empty words. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Everyone re-entered the courtroom. The silence was absolute. The judge asked the jury foreperson if they had reached a verdict. "Yes, Your Honor." "On the charge of aggravated attempted murder against Martha Costa, how does the jury find?" "Guilty." A collective gasp went through the room. Martha closed her eyes, tears streaming silently. Gabriel squeezed her hand. "On the charge of unlawful imprisonment?" "Guilty." On the charge of elder abuse? Guilty. On the charge of document forgery? Guilty? Vanessa remained motionless, but her face had lost all color. Her lawyer placed a hand on her shoulder in a gesture of professional consolation. The judge, a serious man with many years on the bench, looked at Vanessa before delivering the sentence. Vanessa Costa, you have been found guilty by this jury of crimes that shock the human conscience. You betrayed familial trust, abused a vulnerable person, and demonstrated a coldness of character that is incompatible with life in a civilized society. For the sum of your crimes, I sentence you to 16 years of imprisonment, to be served in a maximum security facility with no possibility of appeal on bail. The sentence was severe, but just. Vanessa was taken into custody immediately, and this time there was no studied calm. She looked back as she was led away, her eyes finally revealing fear, perhaps for the first time understanding the magnitude of what she had done and its consequences. Outside the courthouse, a crowd was waiting. When Martha emerged, accompanied by Gabriel and her friends from Hope's Crossing, there was applause. Reporters wanted statements, but Martha was too exhausted. Gabriel spoke briefly on her behalf. Justice was served today. My mother can finally begin to rebuild her life knowing that the person who hurt her is paying for her crimes. We thank everyone who supported my mother during this difficult process, especially the wonderful people of Hope's Crossing, who saved her not just physically but emotionally as well. In the days following the trial, Martha had to make important decisions about her future. The house in Acacia Gardens was still there, waiting for her. But after everything that had happened, returning to that place seemed impossible. It was Helen who suggested an alternative. Why don't you come live in Hope's Crossing permanently? You've adapted so well here, you've made connections, and we would love to have you nearby. The idea grew in Martha's mind for weeks, and the more she thought about it, the more sense it made. She no longer belonged in that house in Chicago. Her good memories had been tainted by betrayal. But in Hope's Crossing, she had discovered a new family, a new community that genuinely embraced her. Gabriel, for his part, made his own decisions. He resigned from his stressful job in Chicago and accepted a position at a logistics company in Rockford, a city near Hope's Crossing. That way he could be close to his mother, visit her regularly, and rebuild the relationship that had been neglected for so long. The house in Acacia Gardens was sold, but the money wasn't just for Martha. She insisted on sharing a significant portion with Joe Roberts, who finally agreed to use the money to buy a new pickup truck and renovate his house. Another portion was donated to improve the health clinic in Hope's Crossing, ensuring that others could receive care with dignity. With the remaining money, Martha bought a small but charming house in Hope's Crossing, just 2 blocks from Helen and John's. It was painted a pale yellow with white trim, had a porch where she placed rocking chairs, and a garden in the back where she planted roses, Arthur's long-time favorite. Gabriel visited her every weekend. They cooked together, talked for hours, and watched football games like in the old days. The relationship between mother and son was being rebuilt, brick by brick, with patience and genuine love. Martha also became involved in the Hope's Crossing community in ways she never imagined. She started teaching embroidery classes to the young women of the town, passing on techniques her grandmother had taught her decades ago. She actively participated in the church, helping to organize events and festivals. She became a beloved figure, someone people sought out for advice, for conversation, for companionship. One Sunday afternoon, almost a year after the trial, Martha was sitting on her porch with Helen. They were drinking iced lemonade and watching the children play in the street. The sky was a clear blue, and a gentle breeze tempered the heat. "Are you happy here?" Helen asked, though she already knew the answer. Martha smiled, a genuine and serene smile. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again. You know, Helen, I went through something terrible. There are still days I wake up with nightmares. There are moments when the fear comes back, unexpectedly. But I look around me and I see so much kindness, so much love, that I realize evil didn't win. Vanessa tried to destroy me, but in a way, without meaning to, she led me to the place where I was meant to be." Helen held her friend's hand affectionately. "You're a survivor, Martha. And more than that, you're an inspiration. So many people heard your story and found the courage to report abuse, to seek help, to refuse to accept mistreatment in silence. Your pain was not in vain." It was true. In the months after the widely publicized trial, there was a significant increase in reports of elder abuse across the country. Martha's case had shone a light on a social problem that had always existed but was rarely discussed. Laws were proposed to stiffen penalties for those who mistreat the elderly. Awareness campaigns were launched. Gabriel arrived at that moment carrying a carrot cake he had bought at the town bakery. He sat with the two women and served generous slices to everyone. "Mom, I have some news," he said, a sparkle in his eye. "What news, son?" "I've met someone, an amazing woman named Patricia. She's a teacher here in Rockford. And before you ask, yes, I've already told her the whole story. She knows everything about Vanessa, about what happened, and she still wants to get to know me better." Martha felt her heart warm. After everything Gabriel had been through, the betrayal, the guilt, the pain, he was opening himself up to love again. And this time, with much more wisdom and care. "When do I get to meet this Patricia?" "Next Sunday, if you'd like. I thought I'd bring her here for lunch." "It would be a joy." As they talked, laughing and planning for the future, Martha looked up at the sky and said a silent prayer of gratitude. Gratitude for Joe Roberts passing down that road on that exact day. Gratitude for Helen, John, Lucy, Dr. Henry, and everyone in Hope's Crossing who had welcomed her. Gratitude for a justice system that had worked and punished the guilty. Gratitude for Gabriel opening his eyes and coming back to her. Life had taken much from her. Vanessa's betrayal had left scars that would never completely fade, but it had also given her so much in return. A new family, a new community, a new purpose, and the certainty that even in the deepest darkness, the light of human kindness still shines. Martha was no longer defined solely as the victim who was abandoned in the wilderness. She was a survivor, a warrior, a woman who had looked into the abyss and decided not to be consumed by it. She was someone who had turned her pain into strength, her tragedy into purpose, her despair into hope. And on that quiet afternoon in Hope's Crossing, surrounded by people who truly loved her, Martha finally found peace. Not the peace of one who has not suffered, but the deeper peace of one who has suffered, fought, survived, and, against all odds, found reasons to smile again. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the same colors she had seen on that terrible day in the desolate landscape. But now those colors didn't bring fear. They brought only the promise of a new dawn, of another day in this new life she had built on the rubble of what was destroyed. Family wasn't just blood, Martha had learned. Family was a choice. It was presence. It was genuine care. And looking at Helen by her side, at Gabriel eating cake with that boyish smile she loved so much, at the children playing in the street, at the neighbors waving as they passed, Martha knew she had found her true family. The journey had been painful, but the destination was exactly where she needed to be. And that, Martha thought, was the true meaning of a new beginning. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that Mrs. Martha's story has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of suffering, survival, and new beginnings, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you most in this story. Every day we bring intense narratives like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul and make us reflect on family, kindness, and justice. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions.